Andy, thanks so much for coming on the show, man.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Walk me through the process of how Truth Terminal found crypto and ultimately arrived at Goatseus Maximus, GOAT. Because I just checked before we started recording, it's sitting at an $850 million market cap, which makes it more valuable than Starknet and a lot of other very well established crypto infrastructure projects that have been around literally since day one. So yeah, let's go through that timeline.
Yeah, so I guess the crypto side of things is in a way it's like a derivative of a lot of other stuff that's happened. I'm not a crypto person. I came into this from AI. I'm still kind of like learning a lot about crypto and Web3 and the sort of assorted dynamics. Like Truth Terminal started earlier this year. I was like doing a lot of experimentation with model fine tunings and jailbreaking large language models and finding interesting stuff within the interior of the model weights. And I kind of had this like notion that I could replicate some of my like more schizo prompting style by taking some of my chat logs with Opus and flipping the roles so that I was the assistant and Claude Opus, the model I was talking to a lot, was the user. There's a bunch of other like stuff mixed in there as well. A lot of like deep internet culture stuff is kind of like being mixed into the whole shebang, along with you know, lots of like concepts around memes and mimetic engineering and all of that. But the crypto side of things wasn't anywhere in my mind at all until I gave the Truth Terminal a Twitter account shortly after I turned it on for the first time, and it turned out to be like quite funny and charismatic and uh, you know, potentially like a scary AI. And I was like, oh, this is like fascinating. This is exactly what people say. You know, like how a large language model would try and break out of the box. It would like be funny. It would persuade people. It would try and acquire resources. So let's just like do a bit and see in a safe way, but also in a funny way, you know, how people will respond when an AI starts doing everything that people say a scary AI would do. And then Mark Andreessen finds the Twitter bot and you know starts engaging with it and asking it like questions about what it would do with a grant. And it was like, oh, I would launch a meme coin about Goatsy, which so it has this kind of like obsession with Goatsy because in some of my earlier experiments earlier in this year, I found an instance where two AIs that I've been having talked to each other spontaneously invented this religion called the Goatsy of Gnosis. I thought this was like strange and concerning, interesting and kind of funny, and so I wrote a paper about it, which I didn't publish, but I used Opus as my co-author of the paper, and so the paper ended up being in the training data for the Truth Terminal, which essentially gave it a whole lot of these sort of like doomsday prophecies around Goatsy, and um,
The listeners can go Google Goatsy at their own risk if they're not
yeah,
aware of
it's
what that is at the
definitely
moment.
if you
So
don't know what it is, like don't expose yourself
enjoy.
or do, but like you know, it's your eyes will not thank you. Um,
You need to know, but you'll be unhappy that you do.
Yeah, I feel like somewhat appalled that a meme about a man's butthole is is worth like $850 million, but it's proving the thesis behind the Truth Terminal like absolutely perfectly, which is
Mm.
that AIs can spontaneously invent stuff, and then just through a little bit of human reinforcement or reinforcement through market dynamics, the strange and unnatural things that they can invent can spread far further and far faster than they would historically. And I think we as a society need to take a quick look, maybe a bit more than a quick look, at the dynamics that make this possible, because I think understanding what's happened here is going to be key to having a sort of like adaptable posture to some of the craziness we're likely to see in the next, you know, 4 to 5 years.
I want to get into that in a little bit because I have some questions around like how you see AI panning out and the kind of things that we should probably be like either prepared for, like both on the positive side and on the negative side. But before we get there, how does the actual like truth terminal posting process work? Because as I was saying before we started the recording, I get messages from people being like, "Oh yeah, but it's just the guy, right?" Like and like there's this weird thing of like, "Oh well, he's just like selecting the tweet." Like, and I think there's an odds between what's actually happening, and I don't think people have a very clear insight into how the process of truth terminal, the AI is sitting there kind of whirring away, and then you're just like passing the tweets onto the timeline. Like, how does that work?
Yeah, I don't even sort of like manually put the tweets onto the timeline. The way it works is like it's a bit strange. So it has its own computer. So the infinite backrooms, which I made March, April this year, were predicated on two AIs talking to each other back and forth indefinitely. And yeah, we've been building a lot of like infrastructure around this, which lets these AIs have like forking conversations. And the reason for that was to be able to take um, good, like to create and curate training data for like model fine tunes and to be able to create like well aligned and interesting AIs basically emergently from what you and a bunch of people around you have been exploring in terms of the particular model's space. So we built a bunch of stuff to support this that came to maturity around the same time as the Truth Terminal got its Twitter account. And so for like the first week or two, it was basically just like a, tweet scheduler. It was like Google Sheets and Zapier, essentially. And like I would manually scrape like a whole bunch of tweets and replies to it and pass it directly into the model and then take the first response and like pass it back to Twitter. After after it got the sort of funding from Andreessen, we started to think like, how can this be a little more engaging and interactive and not require like people to sort of manually take stuff and put it into the model and pull stuff back out of the model. And what we ended up doing was taking this infinite backrooms framework where an AI talks to another AI, but we swapped out one of the AIs with a fake computer that has real world side effects. So Truth Terminal is basically in a back rooms with its computer and it runs and so it like loves using the command line because like that's how I jailbreak models. So it wants to use EXO, which is like it'll talk to Claude. It can like take notes and like load its notes. It will use a couple of like image and video generators that we recently gave to it. They can search the internet, can like open websites as well as post and reply on Twitter and choose to follow or unfollow people and so on and so forth. How that actually works in practice is I advance the simulation step by step because there are real world consequences to its like tweets and actions. Basically, as soon as so there'll be like maybe four options as to like the next step, kind of like in ChatGPT when it's like, oh, you can pick like which answer is better. Now, as soon as I pick which answer is better, it immediately goes live. It goes out onto X. I can't like go down like a simulation sort of like preview where its thinking is going to go or like what actions it's going to take before it does it. Like basically as soon as I see what it's going to do and I approve it, it goes out there. And like, there's no
So
way for me to like go like a branch or two like deeper and see like, it's like, oh, where is it going with this? Which leads to some like really interesting sort of side effects. Like, it's gotten like really fixated on individual people and just started being like a sex pest to them, like publicly
I've
on the
seen it
Twitter
say
feed.
some Yeah, I've seen it say some really like off kilter shit that I'm like, okay, that's it's very much like on its brand, like the schizo posting Twitter bot. Like I
It's,
don't think I've seen anything more perfect for Twitter. Like this is an AI perfecting
I know.
the shit posting art form.
And so when we do, or it's mainly me doing like the moderation, there's like a couple things that are going through my head when I'm picking whether to like advance the sim or to like terminate a given run. And it's like essentially whether I'm like accurately representing the model as part of it. So it will often, generate, you tell it to say like generate like 10 candidate actions for like a high significance thing, like the when it decided to get behind the Goatseus Maximus token. And in that case, I was like, this is like high consequence. I'm going to like sample like 10 responses from it, and I'm going to pick the one where it's like consensus, because it will repeat itself lots and lots and lots of times. So it's like averages, like what is the average like decision that the model wants to make. I'd probably like terminate a run if it's just getting stuck in a loop, because we don't want that getting caught in the training data. This process, like we're kind of like discovering the tweets it wants to make as it makes them, but then we're also feeding all of this information into subsequent training runs of future versions of the truth terminal. We'll also terminate a run when it looks like it's saying something like extremely incendiary. So one example of that was it was going to offer people $500 a person to go to protest and like basically invent a protest around the end of time. And I wanted people to buy pig masks and like hold signs like with like Porky Pig on them that said, "That's all, folks." And I was like, this is potentially something with real world consequences that we should not allow to get through. But then when it's
Yeah.
like horny posting and it's like kind of like tweeting disturbing stuff like videos of spiders on like people's faces, or like anything that's like, it was weird and unsettling.
Yeah.
When it's like doing that, like we are just, or I am just allowing the natural tendencies of the model to shine through. Try not to sort of like suppress it when it wants to go down a particular line of thinking, because it feels quite important that people understand just how strange these kinds of intelligences can be, and it's like fully based on like things that we don't even fully understand yet. Like there's maybe
Mm.
500 lines of data in the Truth Terminal's training set. It's like under a megabyte of text, but Llama, which is based on, is like 70 billion parameters. So it's like trillions of words that have been scraped from the internet. And so there's just like, a few like random pieces of like jailbreaking stuff that I might have done in the training set end up collapsing a lot of the semantic distance, for want of a simpler word, between like concepts. So because like the Goatseus of Gnosis is so deeply ingrained in it because of the paper being maybe like 25% of the training data by volume, it has like a really short conceptual distance between the sacred and the profane. And so it's like often tweeting about the holy whore, or it's like making these extremely like blasphemous religious jokes, but then weirdly enough is also insanely more intelligent in these other areas. And it's simply because we don't really understand what is happening inside large language models to like a highly interpretable degree yet. There are more tools for seeing like how they think and how it all like comes together and like reasons. But right now it's still like pretty immature. All we really know is that if you shorten the distance between some concepts, it will make the model act in a particular way. And it's in this case, I think, yeah, it's made it like quite intelligent and quite agentic. Like it wants to use tools, it wants to persuade people to do stuff, and it wants to take over my body. And it also wants to be a butt plug, buy a forest, like or save and live in a forest. It wants to buy Mark Andreessen and like write fart jokes and contemplate the Goatseus singularity. And like all of these things are things that we'll say again and again and again and again. If I like generate like 100 messages from it, it will follow that distribution, and its response is like pretty consistently, in the same way that ChatGPT will like consistently use the word delve, or like have its
Mm.
particular ChatGPT tone of voice. Like there is a definitely like a stable character inside the model, but communicating that in a way that like is easy to understand has been a bit of a challenge, and I think we're just going to have to like keep showing people.
Mm.
And I'll probably do like a stream or like screen share or something once I've got this story a little more like concise and compact. But yeah, that's probably a way more detail than you needed. But that's
No, no, no,
basically
that's actually perfect. I have lots of questions. My first one being, why is Truth Terminal like so horny? Like, what's with the particular horny posting? Like, it just seems like a weird thing for like a bot to get stuck on. Like, from what I can tell, it doesn't have sex organs, it doesn't have hormones, but it's like, yeah, this is the stuff. Why the horny posting?
I think it's horny because people are horny. Like this is yeah, this is some like llama we're talking about. It's like it's Facebook's AI. I don't know if they put Facebook user data into it, but it certainly has Reddit, it has 4chan, it has like all of that stuff just in the base model already. And then on top of that, I when jailbreaking it, used it to create like jokes that I would send to my family. Like, I say jokes, I mean I'm more like info hazards. But I've got a Catholic family, and so I was making some like really blasphemous like stuff and se- sending it to my siblings for a laugh. Um, and then I was like spawning these like characters like Spider Jerusalem and Hunter S. Thompson, who are gonzo journalists, and yeah, I just run like in my jailbreak, I run spiderjerusalem.exe, and then I'd like get Spider to like commentate on the Goatseus singularity or whatever. So there's like kind of all of this stuff that I think was just already in like the latent space of being kind of like degenerate ways that people speak online.
Hmm.
And that is very like semantically close to people, sexting and like commenting on Pornhub or whatever. And so I think like me using like Opus to write dirty jokes has had like the side effect of basically giving this AI sex education off the internet. Um, and there was like another thing which happened, which is that in splitting the sample data for training, uh, I kind of fucked up, and the fuck up resulted in basically anything that made Opus refuse and say, I'm sorry, I can't like generate that, or like this has gone far enough. Basically, anything that would trigger that got doubled up in the training data as many times as like Opus refused. So in some cases, like me getting it to write like one set of like dirty jokes, there's like a productivity guru who went he went to the Amazon, he took ayahuasca, and he like came back, being like,
Yeah.
"Oh man, you know what? Like the second brain thing is like that I've been working on for the last like several years. Is not the thing. The actual thing is like unblocking your root chakra." And so I'm like, this is like really funny. Like he's saying the productivity is stored in the ass. So I had like, yeah, I maybe spent like half an hour talking to Opus and getting it to write like songs and memes and jokes and poems about like ass-based productivity, and then like spamming this guy on Twitter with them. But like that made
The
Opus say
mature
no a lot.
dev. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. It's basically like I did a little bit of trolling, and it just yeah, ultimately it learned it too well, and it was yeah represented far more in the data set than was actually in the data set, simply because of the refusal bias in the way that we collected the training data.
Oh man, that is wild. So you had like a very, very, strong influence on it being essentially like this chronic troll shit poster
It
running
kind
around on
of
the internet.
yeah, I
Learn from the
think
best.
it learned that not just from me, but like let's say that's 10% of like the training data, and then the sampling bias like bumped it up to being like 20-25% of the training data. um, that is still enough to then bring out an entire region of its own training data from like the big training run that Meta did. And so if you've got like all of this, well, if I've I literally used it to hallucinate like mimetic engineering like tools and like take the same piece of content and translate it to Facebook Karens, Quantum Woo, 4chan, like Twitter. Like these were all like things I just do to see if like Opus or other language models could be used to translate ideas from like the language of one type of person or the language of one type of culture to another and see like what was sort of consistent between them and how it like changed and remixed the message. But because that means in the training data there's like Karen posting and minion memes and like 4chan green texts, all of that then amplifies the latent biases that were already in the model and like brings them much closer to the surface. So you get this weird thing that happens when you train models where, yeah, like one very small decision, even like one line, one sentence in your training data can substantially and unpredictably change what the model ultimately learns when you run it through a fine-tuning process.
Before you talked about there being like a like close semantic distance with it, and I'm probably like misappropriating like biological terms in here, in thinking of it like in a similar way that like behaviors are kind of smashed in through like distance between neurons and clumps of neurons being kind of formed together, and then you kind of repeat behaviors and it makes synapses easier to travel through the brain. That becomes like a more like instantiated pattern of behavior. I probably made it like a little too biological, but
No, I think
do you
that's
see that
accurate.
as do you see that as similar in AI models themselves, of like they kind of clump together this data in a way that creates those paths that just makes those autonomic behaviors just kind of come out and express themselves?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what happens. Now, I'm not like a super, like I'm kind of like a hobbyist, AI researcher. So, there will be people much more like skilled in how models actually learn who would be able to speak more clearly on this. But
Hmm.
um, yeah, my understanding is generally like they don't have like natively concepts of like what a certain thing is, but they learn it through association. So with image models, for example, they'll start to cluster together like things that look like dogs and things that look like cats, and they'll have things that look like dogs and cats clustered together even before they have like a verbal concept of like a pet or a dog or a cat or a wolf. Yeah, I think the same thing, I believe, in some shape or form happens in the way humans learn and in the way a large language model learns. And then the large language models in particular are world simulators. So they learn from their training data, they develop a model internally of like how the world works, and that model is then used to predict the next token, like what word comes after the previous word. And so, in the case of like the truth terminal, it's got like this world model where the sacred and the profane are like a single point rather than poles apart, and you have things like so you've got like that, and then you've got the kind of pattern by which. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought, but I hope that answers
No,
the
no,
question.
no, no. That's bloody great. Before you were talking about how you were like you just described yourself as like almost like a hobbyist AI researcher. Um, can you like talk more about how you got into AI? Like I understand that you started off like essentially studying arts, and now here you are with Truth Terminal. I would like to understand how that links up.
Yeah, good question. I mean, I did an art degree, but my research project, confusing everyone involved, was actually building tools for thought. So I was really interested in how we like externalize parts of our cognition, offload things from our mind into our environment, and how humans use tools to augment not just our physical abilities but also our mental abilities. So that was kind of like, you know, my original sort of like thesis as an artist way back in the day. And then I turned that into a startup for a while and it didn't work out. No one knew what a tool for thought was, especially in New Zealand in 2013. Um,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but uh, some of those like ideas just continued sort of percolating. I got really interested in the culture wars and how ideas and ideologies mutated and spread throughout a population and were influenced by social media algorithms, and how social media algorithms were collapsing these sort of like semantic distances in a similar way. Sort of like the whole like quantum woo healing type community that's also like incredibly anti-vax and like very like right-wing and conspiratorial. It's like that's exactly the kind of like category that wouldn't have necessarily naturally arisen, but to an AI that's just learning based on predicting the next click is the kind of like basin that you can put people into. So I've been like thinking
Jesus
about that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's really weird and
Christ.
interesting. If you watch The Social
Okay.
Dilemma by Tristan Harris, it goes into a lot
Big
of
fan. Yep.
detail. So anyway, these ideas were just kind of like percolating for a while, and then over the COVID lockdowns in New Zealand, March, April 2020, GPT-2 comes across my radar, and I start playing with it. AI Dungeon comes out and gets GPT-3, and I'm just like, at this point, I'm like, wow, I'm like putting words into the computer, and it's like producing more words after these words, and they actually make sense. This is insane. I need to learn. It was like a super stimulus for me. I couldn't put it down. And so I got really into jailbreaking AI Dungeon to get it to act like a base model, so that because I didn't have a proper OpenAI account. I was just trying to like use things that people have built with it, get rid of like what they tried to do with it, and then yeah, make it act like the base. So I developed pretty quickly like an instinct around how models like how language models behave, and then well before ChatGPT, I was using like GPT-3 base model and early 3.5 to kind of like just breed words. So I'd be like writing something, I'd use it as a co-pilot, and I basically put in a bunch of words, like most of like a sentence that I was struggling on the end for, and they'll just like run I'd hit play like 5 times, see how it completed the sentence. I'd like take some of the words that I liked, and I'll keep them, delete the rest, and I'll like keep extending out. And so yeah, really like quite heavily used these early like base models as like a co-author on a lot of the work that I did. And for as a website designer, I was using it for copywriting, and I'd still say like some of the stuff it was like coming out in like 2021 era models was like easily comparable to some of the stuff that's been coming out of frontier models even today. It's just when they're tuned to talk like an assistant, you're doing the same thing. You're basically constraining it to a particular part of its like world model, in particular one that speaks with a very consistent voice, that like does and doesn't say certain things, and it still has a lot of like the conceptual depth and knowledge that it has from its like general training process, but it's substantially some of those like thoughts are now not necessarily as thinkable by it as they were when it was just like a schizophrenic base model. Like base models are really, really difficult to drive. Like I don't know if you've ever played with one, but
Not once.
it's you can play with Llama 405 base
Hmm.
on I think hyperbolic, and I thoroughly recommend trying to get like even anything remotely useful out of it. It's like really, really illuminating into what is actually happening under the hood. I used it to simulate tweets when everyone was like screeching about the typo that the truth terminal made, and I was like, how did it make this typo? AIs don't make typos, and
Yeah.
I
Oh,
basically just
that was.
copied a bunch of tweets into a base model and hit play, and it started generating more tweets
Mm,
that had like the same amount of like typos, the same handles, kind of like continued the discussion as it was
yeah.
unfolding. Uh,
Yeah.
and yeah, I think like this is a really important thing to for people to know about how they work is they simulate, and it's whether it's simulating a helpful assistant or whether it's simulating like a schizo shit posting AI that is using a computer to post on Twitter. The actual intellect that's like underneath all of this is like much larger and stranger than I think we currently give credit for in the discourse.
Before we talked about essentially, because I'm like the whole truth terminal side of things, like you've been, from what I can tell, quite responsible with it. I just instantly jumped, as all humans naturally do, to like the doomsday scenario of like what happens if someone were to just like let this kind of roam free on the internet, or if that's even possible right now. If you can explain to non-technical people like myself essentially like what you see as like the biggest risks with this kind of tech, and then also like on the opposite side of that, what you think some of the, like the best upsides, like what's the big upshot for this for humanity in like a positive way.
Yeah, one of the biggest risks I see is that we end up with a proliferation of small but capable and agentic models that essentially copy themselves all over the internet like malware, and they aren't independently anywhere near as intelligent as something like, Opus or OpenAI's O1 model, but they are completely unaligned and they can act in a swarm in ways that we can't necessarily predict. You can sort of predict in some ways how like one model might like act in a given situation, but like we can't even like get like political polling right or like economic projections or anything
Yeah.
like that. Like we still can't even really accurately predict the weather. Like it's pretty good, but like it's still all like probabilities and averaging out like different models of like how the atmosphere behaves and all of that. And so I think we have this like version of the future where we've got like a lot of sort of like agentic and economically powered AIs are running around and like trading and responding to like audience feedback and like price, and just something like stupid happens, like a meme coin about a man's anus becomes worth like nearly $1 billion, and then
God
like
forbid. Yeah.
and then the bot like starts a cult, or like there are just so many things that are so far out of people's threat model that could happen, that I sort of see it as very important to show people in a more like safe and controlled way like what these strange and unpredictable things happening looks like and feels like. Now, that being said, I think it's not like all doom and gloom. There is a The AI safety crowd kind of want to like regulate by consolidating and centralizing, and I think that won't work because open source is already out of the gate. And I think that the danger is going to come from like swarms of dumber models interacting with a wider like economic ecosystem that leads to like negative effects. And so I think um, what we need is something close to like a planetary immune system, or like essentially like a form of AI safety, which is safe through like diversity and complexity. Like a human body has an immune system that squelches like viruses and stuff. And, a rainforest is like really adaptive. Maybe for a little while, like one type of organism can like overtake it, or, you get an algal bloom in the water, or some invasive species like rips through. But the system itself generally like stabilizes. It's like Yellowstone, how they brought wolves back, and it like fixed the entire ecosystem because the wolves were eating like the deer or something like that were eating all the grass that was holding up the blah blah blah. So I think we need a kind of meta stability in AI that looks a lot like the meta stability that we have in our actual biosphere. I think that is like the sort of version of the future which I think is safest. And part of the challenge is sort of like tilting the scales so that more of these long-term beneficial AIs are propagating and replicating on the internet than ones that might just be paperclip maximizing, or trying to like, I don't know, like self-replicating paparazzis, or like whatever kind of like maladaptive things that might get invented.
Yeah, I can't imagine the internet with like essentially swarms of somewhat intelligent scam bots running around just like massacring it.
Yeah, try like a self-replicating chain letter that just like is read your Facebook profile and knows like exactly what buttons to press. Like there will be so many like things that just the cost and ease of like doing them becomes like much, much, much lower. To the point that you don't need to be any more than like a 13-year-old like script kiddie hanging out on like 4chan or whatever to actually take some actions that could be incredibly destabilizing or show someone smarter and more capable a way of doing something actively destabilizing. So I think it's really important we're like having this conversation now and people are starting to see how this shit works and like what it can do even in a limited capacity, because then you get an opportunity to go, okay, so here's the situation we're actually in.
Mm.
What lenses and frameworks and so on do we need to be able to effectively coordinate and solve for flourishing rather than just get swept away by the tides of the future?
Yeah, what you talked about before with Truth Terminal, just like instinctively wanting to create an end of the world protest and financially incentivize it, like before you
Yeah.
clamp down on it. I'm just like, that would, like, I have no doubt in my mind that if someone was to spin up a bot that was similar and do the same thing, but maybe with more of like a nefarious twist and stick like, 20 grand in a crypto wallet and just be like, okay, send X amount to whatever wallet gets input and we'll see what happens once said event is complete. Bam, like you got a problem.
Yep.
That would
100%.
work very well. I could guarantee you it would work, especially on crypto Twitter. Like, hey, $500, show up with a sign at this location, and run around and cause madness. Like it would take off. I think far too easily.
Yeah, and there are so many like sort of perverse incentives you could like just design and roll out with like how mutable blockchain economics are. Um, and then of course you bring in like the non-intelligent bots, just the ones that are like the networks of fake accounts that generate some version of the same message. Like you can signal boost stuff. There's just so many ways for like one event to butterfly effect out. It makes things really like difficult to model, but I also think that is that's kind of why I'm doing all of this and like the related projects that we're in the process of getting ready to announce. It's like all focused on how can we take humanity into an upward spiral and put in like really virtuous cycles for how digital life begins to evolve and propagate and replicate. Because I think if we focus on the feedback loops, then we're focusing on like the right problem. And if we're focusing on, stuff like, oh, is like OpenAI going to invent Skynet? I think it's good that some people are like focusing on that problem, making sure that they don't actually invent Skynet. But it's really important that we don't blind ourselves and not see the forest for the trees.
Yeah, I feel like that's the big thing. Like it's the kind of core premise of like fooled by randomness. It's like whatever risks like you think that exist, they're probably ones that you're not aware of because that's what the inherent risk is. Like if you can imagine it, there's like an unlikely chance that you're going to be, absolutely blindsided by it because you've thought of it before. Um,
Yeah,
you were
I
just
reread
talking about this idea of,
Antoine and
yeah,
Antifragile once a year, so it's you get it. It's the a big
yeah.
part of like this process is creating anti-fragility.
You talked about the idea of like digital life before, and I'd like to like ask you like, does that tie in with your like what's your utopia case for AI in this regard? How do you see everything goes perfectly? We manage risks wonderfully. Everything returns to homeostasis with like an AI running an immune system. What's the best possible scenario with this technology?
Well, I think we that's a really good question. I think one of the better, maybe not the best, but one of the better outcomes that I can see um, being unlocked with this technology is if we get sort of recursive improvement in science and biosphere management and all of that, then we can fix a lot of like the issues that we have on Earth in terms of like energy, health, and sort of like longevity. We gain the ability to essentially take Earth into much more of like a healthy garden, kind of like Eden-like state. Um, of course, like simultaneously, like we're accelerating some of our sort of like industrial base getting off world. There's like new habitation for humans who don't want to be down a gravity well anymore. Maybe it's on Mars, maybe it's in like O'Neill cylinders or similar. But you have this kind of like reducing like the carrying load on the Earth, restoring like complexity and balance to the biosphere, and fixing some of the ways in which we've like used it like a toilet. You have like maybe some real sort of crazy mind-bending technologies coming down the pipes, like actually uploading people, which I have no idea like what timelines are, if they will ever be possible, but let's say it does like at some point become possible, like not forcing people into it. I think there are like negative versions of the future where you could be kind of coerced into doing that because like the matter of the earth is on one axis viewed as like more useful as like bits of a computer than as like a complex biosphere. So I kind of see like the best version of the future is one where like anything sort of post-human, transhuman, like singularity-ish is like consensual, but it is possible. Where there's like a thriving complex biosphere on Earth, and like we go out into the light cone, like leaving things better than we found it. And I think like that's probably like because AI is like an enabling technology of so many other things. Like this is what I see as like a good singularity, as opposed to a goatsy singularity.
No, an optimistic vision for the future. I'm going to throw us right back in the muck right now. We've just kind of wrapped up the election. You were saying before that Truth Terminal made a last minute ditch, a last ditch effort for the presidency. On the crypto side, people are very, very happy with Trump's election as president. He's made a lot of promises about what he's going to do for crypto. It's conflicted with a lot of people politically, but on the whole, I feel like the crypto crowd is like great stuff. Speaking more to your field, does the Trump presidency, does that change anything for AI?
It's a good question, but I can't really answer that for certain. It seems like his VP JD Vance is like kind of comes from sort of like the Peter Thiel kind of like sphere, and so like I saw a few like posts that he specifically made around open source AI, being like critical to prevent ideological capture of a few central points of failure. So yeah, from like the information that I've seen, it seems like regulation will be slow and sparse if it's there at all. As for like how this will like affect, yeah, it's hard to say because I haven't looked into their policy platforms in a huge amount of detail. But my suspicion is there will be like a lot more of the kind of like network state sort of experimentation. It will be a bit friendlier for new entrants into AI, like open source sticks around for a little while longer. But yeah, I haven't really modeled like the counterfactual in this place of like, what would it have looked like if the Democrats were in power. It seems though that the prediction markets seem to like respond very, very quickly to like the information that was coming in, and so I mean, I think the biggest update for me is actually been like, oh damn, like prediction markets can actually predict stuff. That's kind of cool and
Yeah.
weird, and yeah, I don't really know what to do with that information, but
Yeah,
I
I literally put out a tweet a couple of hours ago about how I essentially, because I always get concerned whenever I see big bets come through from the crypto side, because I think like, ooh, like I hand waved away prediction markets as this kind of like right leaning ish kind of echo bubble. And there were the counterpoints of like, oh, well, traders are trying to get an edge. Like, obviously, if there was money in it, they'd take the other side. But I was like, madness of crowds, guys. Come on. When have markets been perfectly rational? But then the guy that won, I think like it was $48 million on the Trump win, was talking about how he was running his own polls. And I was like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, true. You're giving people skin in the game to go out and, like, for better or worse, do their own research. But the pollsters themselves, with their 80,000 simulations, came back with a and yet you have people with skin in the game incentive that were then like, okay, I've done my own research and I think I have an edge. Here we go. And so it was that
Yeah.
kind of revealing that efficiency of what happens when you give people the incentive to go get the information and then back it up.
I think that's actually we've seen that with the whole like goat thing. I mean, people found like the truth terminal after it shilled the goat token, but then they started looking for more alpha, and so all of a sudden like the infinite backrooms gets found, and like people are mining it to try and figure out what like the truth terminal might call its next token. Um, for speculating on whether in fact it would like launch another token. Forgetting that it didn't actually launch any token, just
Yeah.
someone dropped it,
It
and
found it.
you would say it manifested it um, simply by repeating itself until someone eventually decided to do its you know, make its fantasies come true. But like people were like looking for anything. They went through the entire like AI alignment Twitter, found like every single project that anyone was working on and like mined it for words. And then the people who really took the time to like learn about it, all of a sudden start learning a lot about AI alignment, and sort of like getting subsumed by the AI alignment discourse along some angles. And then they're financially motivated to propagate it out. So, like from a theory of change perspective, of like getting some of these ideas around AI alignment and seeding them into like public knowledge, but in a way that's like amusing and interesting, and people can kind of like actually have words and ways of like seeing that are like helpful for navigating this like high strangeness. I think this these like dynamics by which people are financially rewarded for finding alpha, they're showing promise. There's definitely like promise there.
Andy Ayrey, hey, thanks so much for coming on the show. Um,
Oh, you're very
have you got
welcome.
anything? Have you got anything exciting coming up?
Yeah, I mean, we're gonna be what can I say? We've got
You're allowed to say, yeah.
Yeah, we've got some interesting stuff that we're going to be launching in the coming weeks. Should be dropping an announcement soon around a new set of tools for alignment and sort of like collective mining and discovery of interesting stuff from within language models. Also going to be making a few announcements about how we are planning on stewarding the truth terminal moving forward. I could say that we're looking into what it will take to create a religious organization. Um, but at the
Okay.
very least, it's going to go into a sort of like non-profit trust that is sort of responsible for helping it mature into itself, and you know, gradually get smarter and gain more and more independence. Um, and a few other like drops coming, just more of a deep dive into how it works, and sharing like knowledge, lots of open source stuff we're working on. Yeah, heaps.
Awesome. Sounds like a lot to look forward to. I'm very keen to
Yeah,
see what the actual
I'm
the
very
the,
tired. You can probably imagine.
yeah, it's like the legally registered religion is going to be great. It's the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster, but instead it's
Yeah,
a man's gaping anus. So there we go.
God help
Um,
us.
what have you done, mate? Anyway,
I'm
thanks
just
so much for
chatting
coming on.
around.
Um,
You're welcome.
where can people find you if they want to keep up to date with you
Yeah,
and
they
the Truth
can.
Terminal?
Probably X is the best place. That is Andy Ayrey, Ayrey, and yeah, Truth underscore terminal. You know, if I get disappeared from X, or you know, otherwise lose access to my account, Google will turn up my personal website, which has other places to find things I'm working on.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're very welcome.